Hello, everyone. My name is Chris. I am a student of anthropology at the California State University of Fullerton.
And I am Garrett. I am a graphic designer and illustrator.
And this is Dialup Dessert, a podcast about art, media, and nostalgia. And today's episode, we are looking over everyone's favorite nostalgic art and media, or at least they'll tell you it's their favorite, Vaporwave. So today, we will begin by talking about the early history and the influential genres that brought about this micro-genre, as Wikipedia likes to describe it.
Ah, yes. A microgenre with its own microgenres.
After all, you can't have a micro-genre, 8 or 9 other little things dangling off. So, Vaporwave's inspirations reach pretty far back, as far as weird niche musical genres go. It can be rooted back as far as the late 70s, and sometimes even before, depending on the particular topic of the album. One of the most obvious, and to what a lot of people who listen to Vaporwave, one of the most noticeable influences, of course, is commercial and tech media from the late 90s in particular. Early 3D renderings, of course, little landscapes with palm trees and a sunset in the background, usually over the ocean. I'm sorry.
The statue heads.
Of course, yeah.
Roman statues.
The broken up Roman busts are a classic. Although that one seems drawn out of ancient history, of course. That's a little older than the 1980s.
Oh, what?
I can't believe it or not. A lot of it is just tech from the 80s and 90s. There's an obsession with cassette, with physical media like that, with old, bulky computers, CRT screens, scanline, VHS. All these things are very influential in the genre. And anyone who's listened to any of it or is very into the full-width aesthetics will tell you it's all about the aesthetics. That's the whole thing.
Of course.
And what we'll talk about in a lot of these albums is, in fact, the aesthetics. Almost all of these early songs, and indeed many current Vaporwave tracks, are very tied up in aesthetics, in the visual that they evoke, or sometimes the visuals they specifically use in the album to try and evoke something in the listener. If they're accompanied by a YouTube video, you can expect cut and spliced loops of Sailor Moon, any old anime, because Japanese culture from the 1980s is a huge influence genre.
Japanese commercials.
Exactly. You can expect recycled footage of Knight Rider or any number of old cool guy cars cruising at night through Miami or Los Angeles or New York. Now, let's move to the first thing that I think sets Vaporwave apart as a genre, as a micro-genre anyway. It's not unusual for love nostalgia. And we've discussed this before, but there is a memory that is evoked when you listen to Vaporwave, a memory of this forgotten time, that there is this era that is lost to us now, and we are looking at it through this dimly lit facsimile, right? We're looking through a window into the past, but it's kind of foggy. It's out of focus.
Mm-hmm.
There's a great influence from lost media. The fact that I'm blanking on the name of the artist who put it this way. I believe it was Daniel Lopatin, but it could have been one of the other early artists who put it. It's like finding a. Oh, I think he said cassette. I want to say he said cassette. It's like finding a lost cassette in a dumpster behind a thrift store.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter where it came from, but what matters is that it brings you to a place that is not quite here.
Well, it's the diamond in the rough kind of thing, you know?
Well, and as we'll learn, there's a lot of rough to cut through when you're dealing with vaporwave.
Oh yeah, very much so.
Okay, so we can move on to the inception of the genre with Echo Jams in 2010 by that same Daniel Lopatin. So we listened to this album, Garrett, you and I,
Mm-hmm.
and we listened to just a couple of tracks, although I have heard the album in its entirety before, though I never paid particular attention to the tracks.
Me too.
Um, so when listening to the first track, what was brought to mind? What image was conjured for you?
Okay, so if I remember correctly, the beginning was extremely rough, very abrupt in nature, jumping from different tones, being really loud to being really soft and slow. Um, it's constantly trying to find a state of flow, but doesn't really relax until the end of the song, really.
I would agree, and it's funny that it chooses such a pleasant and such a famous song. It chooses Toto's Africa, this excellent rock and roll, uh, anthem from the 80s. I want to say it was 1984, but I cannot remember.
Oh, me
Uh,
neither.
and yet it's got this sound. It sounds like it's not so much a broken record. It's a corroded cassette tape you're listening to. It's skipping around. The vocals loop weirdly, but the instrumental loops on its own as if it's being carried on a different cassette somehow. Um, it it reaches this acceleration. It crescendos near the end where the instrumentals start overlapping frantically, and it's this genuinely haunting and unnerving kind of sound. And that is what characterizes a lot of vaporwave throughout the genre
Mm-hmm.
until we start seeing the splitting of microgenres from it, where some preserve that quality and some ignore. But there's that dissonance mixed with the kind of euphoria of finding something pleasant and nostalgic. Now, the second track, just entitled A2, all the tracks on this album are A and a number, of course, is it opens with this same skipping sound that we had in the previous track,
Mm-hmm.
where you had this kind of glitch, quote unquote, sound. It's a remixed song, but it's been chopped up in a way to sound like it's having trouble catching initially. The audio won't start flowing just yet. Um, and in A2 in particular, it's this sensation of it. It's almost like someone changing the station on a radio, and they're rapidly switching around, and they keep the same station. Everything else is static. At least that's what I got out of it.
Yeah.
But they end up bringing it right back to "Angel, Please Don't Go," which is the chorus of the song, repeating ad nauseum. The instrumental in the track is labored and droning. It's very much the previous one, and a lot of the vaporwave tracks that we'll talk about are very much the same thing. They labor on like they're just being dragged forward. They're always a slowed down version of the original.
Mm-hmm.
I, I believe there's a comment on the original video for the song that is sampled on not Farsight, on Floral Shop. There's a comment on the original song that Ramona Xavier sampled from, saying, "This is like a Nightcore version of Lisa Frank 420."
Oh, from It's Your Move by Diana Ross.
Yes. This idea that you're oh no, it's sped up. This is improper. This is not what this song should sound like.
Honestly, yeah, I got that same feeling listening to it the first time because I had only ever listened to Lisa Frank 420 without ever going back and searching for its original counterpart. Uh, Very strange feeling. Goes by so
Oh yeah,
fast. I
definitely.
didn't even know it was a woman singing the original song,
Yeah,
just from how sped
yeah.
up it is by
The
comparison.
track on, well, I suppose we'll get to that. but these tracks are so slowed down and distorted sometimes. It's harder to even tell what they might have been sampled from. Pretty familiar with the original song, and you recognize the chorus right away.
Mm-hmm.
You probably won't ever really know what the track was unless someone told you, or maybe you look it up and you figure it out that way. But I think that's kind of an important facet of the genre, is that things are obfuscated enough. They're hidden behind this veneer of you're listening to a broken down song playing at you through like a thin wall in someone's dorm.
It's very much recycled music in a way.
Yeah, and uh, as we might or might not know, those of you listening, it becomes a huge critique of the genre that is just recycled bullshit from the 80s. And the critique is not entirely unfounded, unfortunately. Um, After about 2012, well, in the beginning of 2012, we began seeing a lot of these really heavy critiques of the genre. We see this just obnoxious, endless stream of I'm not going to say post-ironic unironically, but we see, and I'm doing big scare quotes, post-ironic, and then whatever would come after that, I don't know what it would be, but variations of vaporwave. You get these god awful Simpson wave shit. You get all these weird little micro genre, like one song, and it gives itself its own genre name,
Mm-hmm.
but it's just a recycled track from whenever, or it's a whole bunch of lines from a TV show repeated ad nauseum.
But they're still like extremely popular if you look at the numbers of like how much they're listened to, how much views they have on YouTube. And
Yeah.
in a way, they do still capture the spirit, I guess, of invoking nostalgia, just in like a
No,
really
they.
hyper specific way. Where vaporwave itself is very broad, and I guess is meant to appeal to a lot of people who associate with '90s culture. Stuff like
Mhm.
Simpsons Wave is only really liked and enjoyed by someone who was a Simpsons fan, like in that very specific era.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you will have genres specifically trying to appeal to who experienced those things in the past,
Mm-hmm.
and then you have the kind of broader, vaguer sound that we will get to. That's very much more just kind of a, well, I hesitate to say soothing because some of these tracks are definitely not,
Oh yeah.
but you get these kind of gentle, um, almost droning pieces that are extremely nostalgic, but for nothing in particular. They're all instrumental. They make you feel for a time before now, and it's always vague.
Yeah.
And I guess it's just the purest kind of nostalgia. It's just playing on that pure feeling. Um, we talked about A2. A4 was, in my opinion, the most atmospheric of the tracks on the album.
Yes, I got a very
Um,
easygoing feel to it.
it was a short little track. I believe it was only like a minute and 40 seconds long.
Yeah, it did not
And
overstay its welcome. Very much less intense. There's a stark contrast between A4 and A3 right before it. A3 being
yeah,
really hard hitting with its beginning.
and it's almost just a lead into A5. It's just this plays for, then A5 comes in. Um, but to leave Echo Jams behind, oh, actually, before we depart, I would like to make note of Echo Jams starting a trend that the next album wouldn't really follow, but we will see a lot more later on, where the album art is a weird collage. In this case, it's purely from Echo the Dolphin, the Sega Genesis title,
Yeah.
uh, cut and moved around, much like the music. Wow, imagine that. They did the same thing for the design. Uh, so they used Echo the Dolphin, like the letters, and Mega Drive, like Sega Mega Drive. They used those letters to write out uh, Echo Jams. And I believe he used a pseudonym, didn't he? Yeah,
Chuck
Chuck
Person?
Person's Echo Jams. That's right.
Yeah.
Duh. That's what it says on the front of the album. I'm looking right at it. And that kind of obfuscation behind a fake name, for one, and using an album cover and music, really, throughout the album that is just drawn from other media in kind of this like totally deadpan way would influence a lot of Labor albums. But our next one on the line up here is pretty much disconnected from that. It itself would influence a lot of Vaporwave, but it is very distinct from Echo Jams, and that's Farside Virtual by James Ferrara. In 2011, he dropped this album, released only on cassette, which is that's something that's playing into
Very
nostalgia,
aesthetic.
I believe. If only I had a cassette player in my car had one, but then I totaled that thing. So,
My car has a cassette player.
bro, that's really vaporwave of your car manufacturer.
Yeah, it doesn't work though, unfortunately, but
That's not very vaporwave of your car.
it really wasn't.
um, so Farsight Virtual. Now, Echo Gems, that's the inception of this whole genre. It is the point at which this sound is kind of like coming into its own, right? It's being developed still. Echo Jams was kind of an extension of like hypnagogic pop, which
Mm-hmm.
is a precursor genre. There was a lot of influence from like atmospheric music, and I've seen people say like online because that's the only place people talk about vaporwave. Because if you ask people in real life if they like vaporwave, they look at you like you have a third head.
Yeah.
Um, but if you ask people online about it, uh, they seem to recognize Echo Jams, but it's often Farside Virtual and Floral Shop that they're more familiar with. Um, but there's this like it's like a distillation of what atmospheric music was trying to do. It was sampled from music, not field recordings, not just ambient noise or anything trying to be soothing. It was just previous music, but remixed and chopped up in a way that sounded very false and electronic. So Farside Virtual, on the other hand, is very much composed. It samples a lot still, but it's got this immediately identifiable synthetic sound. It was composed in GarageBand after. Um, it's notable that Ferrara makes no attempt to disguise the fact that these are not real musical instruments. Everything is very cutesy and kind of light and airy and very playful,
Mm-hmm.
I think you made a remark about how it's pretty distinct from most of these other albums.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, it gave me like PlayStation One vibes.
Yeah, exactly. That you made that point, and I made sure to write that down too. It was extremely evocative of the PS1 startup sound.
Mm-hmm.
Although none of the tracks on Farside Virtual are particularly haunting, because the PS1 startup sound legitimately scared the hell out of me as a child because I was an idiot. Apparently, I was like a wild animal that would get spooked by like deep noises or something. The PS2 sound also did not bode well with me, but that comes later. The official cutoff point for vaporwave influences is apparently 2001. I didn't know this,
The
but
official.
yeah, I don't know how official it can be. I don't think there's a sitting council of vaporwave anywhere.
We can start a sitting council. How about that?
Okay, now as the chairman of this sitting council, I set the cutoff date at 2001.
Yep. Now it's official.
Yeah, because after 9/11, things can't be nostalgic. It's just real.
Yeah. Very true.
We didn't do a track by track breakdown in Farsight version, but I didn't feel that it was totally necessary because the influences that are brought here are pretty clear. Lots of sampling, lots of this like cutesy little fake sound that you'll see later in offshoot genre soft, where it's not trying to sound authentic or okay. This might sound rude to anyone who likes Mallsoft, but Mallsoft is often not even trying to sound particularly. It's trying to just sound like ambient kind of calm mall music, which has some value, I guess.
Oh yeah, it totally
Um,
does.
I'm no real music critic, so I won't be too harsh, I guess.
For clarification, none of us are actual like music critics. We're mostly here to look at the cultural significance of this genre and its
Yeah,
impacts.
and our breakdown of each of these albums is to kind of give a quick history of the genre as a whole. Most of our discussion will come at the end when we talk about the influences, what we think about it, the other genres that it influenced, and the other cultural artifacts that have come out of it. I am, after all, an anthropologist, and my focus is in cultural anthropology. So I have a great interest in weird little online communities, strange little niche societies, their own obsessions with full width aesthetics.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely haven't written any paper for any of my graduate level courses about vaporwave. No, sir. That would be ridiculous.
Have you seriously done that?
I'm working on one.
Well, there you have
That's why
it.
I wanted to do this because it's a good intro.
Well, nice way to incorporate study habits, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I've already studied more on vaporwave now than I have on, well, okay, with a couple of exceptions, than almost any other topic that I've studied in school. So yeah, I wrote a lot about uh what was that culture in South America on Lake Titicaca?
I got no clue,
This,
man.
this is not a joke. Okay, well, whatever. I wrote like a 26-page report. Um, uh, Not Teotihuacan. That was in Mexico. Doesn't matter. All right, we're moving on.
All
I'm getting
right,
distracted.
sounds good.
So we're gonna move on to 2011 with Floral Shop by the artist Vectroid, whose actual name is Ramona Andra Xavier. Um, Now this is the vaporwave album. If these first two were the inception, this is the messy bathtub birth of the genre.
My God.
Yeah, I was saving that metaphor.
Oh, I know you
Um,
were.
this is the iconic sound. It defined so much of the genre, and as we all learned after 2011, we got an endless goddamn stream of just BS trying to be Floral Shop, but failing completely, falling flat on its face. People thought that it's now easy and there was no barrier to entry. All you had to do was remix an old song and make it slow and name your album fucking Simpson Wave or whatever. I think I already made that joke. I'm not going to use that joke again. Okay.
All right, nice.
There's a slow fade in. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say that. Okay, so you already mentioned that Floral Shop was the defining point of the genre. This is like what really set the standard here for anything that would come afterwards.
Yes.
Um, when you talk about vaporwave, anyone who's like generally unfamiliar with it, this is what they would think of. This incorporates like all the main aesthetic choices. You get like the marble heads. You got like the weird, almost like old textbook quality, 90s imagery on the
Yeah, yeah.
album.
The
Uh,
bad 3D renders.
yeah, the bad 3D renders, the distortion of all the music, the echoes, the slowness. Um,
Yeah, and these are things drawn from these previous two albums. Maybe not on purpose, but they're very much present in Floral Shop still.
yes, Floral Shop embodies all these elements together.
Yeah, yeah. It's got that slow chugging resonant instrument. It's very much like the labor instrument in I keep forgetting the name of Echo Jams. I should know that. It's pathetic. I keep having to reference my notes. It's very much got that same kind of like laborious, like it's just struggling to go on. And of all the tracks on here, you gotta talk about Lisa Frank 420. I'm not going to try to pronounce the Japanese, and a lot of these later artists love themselves some Japanese. I'm
Yeah.
I am not going to embarrass myself if I even try.
So, a very distinct part of Vaporwave that we're going to start seeing from this point onwards is that it starts to embody a lot of Japanese culture specifically. So, almost all of these albums will incorporate like Japanese characters through like really poorly edited, like Google Translate. You know what I mean?
Oh
Um,
yeah.
yeah, we're going to start seeing clips from like old 90s Japanese pop, and that's going to spring into its own subgenre later on. It's very important in a lot of ways. And I'd say the reason for that is, Chris, you kind of brought up the point how there was like a huge like economic boom around that same time, right? That was
Yeah, in
mostly
the
alien to the
1980s was
West.
Japan's like boom decade.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the time in which they produced a huge amount of their most famous cultural artifacts that continue to this day, obviously, but became immensely popular in that decade. And it followed in the 90s, but the 90s were Japan's last decade, so that's a whole other topic for another day. Um, but there's these artifacts from this time where there was this enormous commercial culture in another country, so it's obfuscated enough. There was this layer of um, like abstraction. You
Mm-hmm.
could identify some of the parts, but it was never 100% clear. You could never really get the whole picture because if you don't read or speak Japanese, and most Americans don't, it will always be like a slightly alien thing to you. And I think that's part of the art of making this stuff nostalgic, is that you can't be 100% um, not transparent, but I guess a good way to describe it is a lot of this music almost feels like it's underwater. Like it's never quite out in the open, like when you're underwater and your hearing's kind of muffled, you
Mm-hmm.
feel kind of like enclosed. You never quite burst out of the surface of the water with any of this stuff without it becoming a new genre entirely. I'm making too many metaphors here, and I'm gonna start mixing, so I will stop. I'm only gonna make one more birthing metaphor.
All right,
Um,
sounds good.
all right, so that's I'm gonna forget that I said that. So.
Where do we carry on from here?
So I just had some notes about, like in Echo Jams, there's a slow fade in Floral Shop,
Mm-hmm.
um, where it gets progressively louder, and we're specifically talking about Lisa Frank 420. I should mention just that one track.
Yeah.
So it starts off kind of quiet and distant, and it fades in, and it gets pretty loud. It
Oh
it
yeah.
almost reaches the surface of the water. Okay, I promised I would stop using metaphor. It
You
almost
said one
reaches
more,
like
right?
uh well, I said one more birthing metaphor. That wasn't, well, I guess, what, I don't know. It doesn't I'm not gonna think about it. The vocals skip repeatedly on this track. They never quite get a chance to finish. Especially in the beginning, the vocals come in for like two words and then they're cut, and they keep skipping like that as they progress through. Like the machine is struggling to read the data or something.
Yeah.
But the instrumental continues. Um, let's see. There's this. I mean, this is the resonant, nostalgic sound. This is the one that everyone saw with like we just said, the marble bust and all that. And this is the one that would, for the next couple of years, man, all we're gonna see is a million freaking versions of League 420 that nobody wanted. That
I wanted them.
basically almost killed the genre, and there would be an album that would come out 2 years later. Yeah, 2 years later, called Vaporwave is Dead, and
Yes.
then there'd be another Vaporwave is Dead kind of movement or genre. I think there's a subreddit made for it, which is about the weirdest thing to make.
The ultra
Um,
niche.
yeah, yeah. Let's make a niche within our niche. That's a good idea. No, that's fine though. Let them make their stupid
Before we
subreddit.
get into Death of the Vaporwave, because I very much want to conclude on that. We should talk about Sail Away for a little bit.
I think we should. Well, first, let's touch on Blank Banshee.
Okay, yeah, you know more
Blank Banshee
on that than
comes a
I do.
year before Sailor Wave
All right.
in 2012, and this is right around the time where SoundCloud in particular was becoming absolutely saturated with Vaporwave.
Oh yeah.
Low quality, um, cheap. I mean, the cost of production is irrelevant. Freaking Echo Jams and Farside Virtual were both entirely composed on like crap ass hardware. So, well, I mean, whatever. Actually, I don't know what Echo Jams is composed on. Sorry, I shouldn't be so mean to Echo Jams, but it is just spliced around existing music.
Right.
Um, and right before Blink Banshee released his first album, we saw a million clones of Lisa Frank 420 all over SoundCloud, and people liked the sound, and they weren't particularly discerning. They were there for the aesthetics, right? They were there for the fuel of nostalgia, for the memory of a time that never was. The kind of comfort of sitting in front of a CRT screen in the middle of the night with like your friggin' Game Boy. They would have had Game Boys at the time. Yeah, okay, that's accurate. Good.
Game Boys existed, yes.
That's not an anachronism. I'm probably gonna make a few later, but
That's all
we'll
right.
get. But then Blink Banshee comes out in 2012 with Blink Banshee Zero. He would follow up with Blink Banshee One, and then another album whose name I'm forgetting.
Blink
And he
Banshee
just
2.
released a single recently, Metamorphosis, which is quite good.
Haven't listened to it.
But the first Blink Banshee album was pretty significant. It was this genuinely original contextualization, right? It was sampled music still, but like you said, Garrett, it had this clear trap and like hip hop kind of influence, very, very much visible in it. Um, I Were there lyrics in any of that in any of the songs in that album? I don't believe there were.
I don't think there were.
I think it was all instrumental. Um, and Blink Banshee really started a different trend that you'll see later in other kinds of vaporwave and vaporwave offshoots of using computer lingo to name the track's funny things. So the first track being B:/ startup, that kind of shit.
Things you just
But then
can't
he would also
pronounce.
have tracks like Teenage Pregnancy or Teen Pregnancy. What is it called?
Yeah, that's what it's called.
Yeah,
A lot of just really obscurely named tracks.
which is funny. I mean, there's always a kind of tongue in cheek kind of like, oh haha, look how funny I am. Look at this silly thing that I made.
Yeah, there's always a little bit of irony attached to all of it.
And I think there kind of has to be, right? You're looking at a time that never was, or if you are looking at a real time, you're filtering it in a way to kind of push away like the ickier parts of it
The
because you're
rose tinted glasses.
recontextualizing like glossy corporate culture, like just this cheap chintzy bullshit from the 80s and 90s
Mm-hmm.
that was, it was just a product and you're trying to make it into something pretty. You kind of have to have a sense of humor about it. Sorry, were you about to say something?
I was just gonna make the rose tinted glasses comparison.
Oh no, definitely. That's a big deal, and I think it's part of why it became so popular. Is that I mean, people love remembering shit from their childhood. So if something's really vague, kind of just just tickles that little part of your brain just enough that you're like,
Yeah.
ah, I remember the good old days when and and you fill in whatever you want. And my mic was not cutting out. Okay, that was me leaving blanks. Um, I'm gesturing with my hands, but you can't see it.
Gestures with hands.
So the beats present in Blank Banshee, zero anyway. I believe Blank Banshee 1 follows up similarly because that would be the next year, but it had a similar sound. Um, but it had this clear trap influence, and it made clear what I think is very important is that Vaporwave doesn't have to be Lisa Frank 420, another 10,000 times compiled into a 10-hour playlist on YouTube or put onto like, lo-fi hip hop beats to study to with an anime GIF. It's clear that there's, a new step that can be taken. The genre can change and evolve, but still be the same genre, right?
Right. It just takes influence from other genres. We have the techno music. We have electronica. We got the trap beats. Uh, Kind of slow club vibes to it.
Yeah, and most importantly, and at the center of all of this, you have that glossy consumer culture of the 1980s, common to Japan and the
Yes.
United States. Um, and mixed in, you have a lot of the things that people might specifically be more nostalgic for, which is like um, impersonal internet kind of stuff from the 90s. and the early 2000s, I guess, the
Right.
very early 2000s, because like we said, it ends in 2001. That's our hard and fast rule.
Yep, the official date.
So following Blink Banshee, and this is a nice transition into a potential other episode, would be Sailor Wave in 2013 by Macross 82 to 99. I do not know if I pronounced that. This is like a pretty significant album. I wouldn't say it's the most significant. I'm no expert on this kind of stuff.
I would say
I
it's significant because this is where you said that wasn't the beginning of like the more niche subcultures or subgenres of vaporwave, where, for example, Simpsons Wave,
Simpsons
Simpsons
Wave,
Wave, lo-fi hip hop, city funk, uh, future wave, or something like that. Uh,
Future Funk,
Future
and
funk,
Synthwave, and
right?
Outrun, all that stuff.
Sail Away wasn't the beginning of that, but this is, I'd say, a prominent version of that,
Yeah,
where
I
it's highly targeted towards invoking nostalgia from people who were adamant fans of Sailor Moon back in the late 90s, I think.
Yeah, because Sailor Moon would end in '99, just like Sailor Wave's, or Macross's name, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So Macross would release Sailor Wave, and I believe he has a follow-up album. Let me check really fast.
Macross did a bunch of stuff. They were a huge contributor.
Good lord, this guy has a lot of albums I did not even know.
Oh, yeah. I listened to a
Oh,
lot
he
of.
would follow up with A Million Miles Away, which we can briefly touch on because I've actually heard that album in its entirety, and I really like it.
Oh, yeah?
Um, and he wouldn't make anything until 2017, apparently. That's okay. Ain't
Yeah,
nothing
this
wrong
is
with that.
pretty late in the timeline.
Yeah. So this is after the quickening, right? This is after the genre has proved to have the ability to change. And we will get into Vaporwave is Dead. But I think this is proof that if it isn't just a isolated little micro genre that is to die off, like witch house and shit gaze, and yeah, that is an actual genre. Look it up; it's on Wikipedia.
Shit gaze?
Yeah, I'm saying look it up to like the listeners, not to you. There's these weird little micro genres that were born and died because they were too niche or the sound just got old. There was sea punk, I think, was one that was popular on Tumblr for a little while.
Oh, boy.
And that one had an aesthetic associated with it too. It was like aesthetic, not like Sailor Moon, like actual Sailor.
Sailor aesthetic.
Yeah, it
Nice.
was it was a time.
Tumblr was
Oh,
very important for kind of containing the aesthetic elements of.
oh, definitely, yeah. And Tumblr was the perfect like breeding ground for the aesthetics of this genre and for future micro genres
Mm-hmm.
until that whole thing where they lost like 40% of their user base.
As they do.
That's another episode. That's another time we'll talk
But
about that.
now everything's just on Instagram, so it's all good.
But Sailor Wave, I think, is a different kind of proof of stability that not only can Vaporwave evolve, but it can spawn entirely new sound with new influences distinct from the other ones. So this one has a particular aesthetic associated with it, which is Sailor Moon,
Mm-hmm.
often filtered in a way that's really glossy and colorful. But there's also, the copious Japanese text all over everything. Many of the tracks incorporate what do you call the Japanese characters?
Kanji?
I don't know. It incorporate a lot of the, in addition to all caps English, although later albums would not do that.
Oh, the all caps, like spaced out kind of
Not
thing.
spaced out, interestingly. No,
Oh,
just all
really?
caps. Yeah, the first track is New Dawn in all caps, and then Japanese, and then Japanese, and then another Japanese, and
Nice.
then a Japanese character next to the word temples. I won't go through the whole thing.
Fascinating.
But Sailor Wave, it proved the ability to satisfy different niches within the community, or even beyond it. This is about the time that some of the very early 10 plus hours extended mix of whatever music it would be and we would see artists specifically remixing music for those kinds of videos.
Right.
Um, Not very many. Macross continued to make regular albums and music, and continued to be quite good for many years, and still makes music, I believe. Okay, so we we gotta talk about Vaporwave is dead.
Wait, before we get there, I believe we both made some notes on Telepath the artist. If you want to like briefly go over that.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, Telepath comes after Vaporwave is dead.
Oh, did they really? Okay,
I
never mind then.
believe so, because Vaporwave is Dead would be released. I am
2015,
wrong.
right?
Never mind. Vaporwave is Dead comes out the next year. Okay, let's talk
Okay.
about Telepath.
So
Chris is wrong. This will be a repeat theme here. So Telepath, take it away.
all right. So Telepath, kind of a detour to where we were talking about with Sailor Wave. Telepath is more so just pure vaporwave. Not necessarily in the vocal context. All of it is mostly there just to invoke like the chill moods. All of it is instrumental, usually packed together with like just a short looping anime gif to give you a brief visual. But yeah, there's not a whole lot to it. They have a lot of albums. They're a really good artists that I love.
Oh yeah, no, exceedingly prolific. Like just an insane amount of output from this guy.
Yeah, it's kind of creepy, man. There's so much. There's so much work.
Um, and Telepath does um, really leave a mark because when I first really started getting into listening to this was not when these albums were being released. I first started listening the year after I graduated high school in 2014, which is when Telepath would release some of his first music. And I found a Spotify playlist, I believe, and it was like Vaporwave Mega Mix or whatever. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and it was like 90% Telepath stuff, or Telepath sounding stuff anyway. And Telepath had that particular sound, and I feel that he almost like perfected what was being sought after in like Floral Shop, and I mean even in earlier albums, but Floral Shop is one that comes to mind because it's very distant and um, very electronic. Obviously, it's very much synthetic, but it feels very far away and kind of foreign. It's got this like mystique about it. Like it's not all there for you. You've found just a piece of this thing. The fact that every friggin' track is in Japanese makes it particularly hard to parse.
Yeah, and to reference individual songs, thank you very much.
Yeah, because I do not speak Japanese, unfortunately. Like I said, embarrass myself. It's important to note that Telepath's name says Telepath and then a bunch of Japanese afterward. What is it, katakana, right? Their letters? I think is what they are. We're going to go with that. But this guy releases like 3 albums a year, which is just insane. I mean, it looks like in 2014 released like, wait, I can't count. Never mind, 2. And I've heard a mind-melting number of these tracks. But the thing is, I couldn't tell them apart if you were to ask me. I probably couldn't pick out my favorite one, because I don't think I have a favorite one. Whereas with a lot of these other genres, yeah, no, Lisa Frank 420 is probably my favorite one off of Floral Shop. Yeah, I know that's a real normie pick, but sorry, that's the good one.
Fucking normie.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, this is welcome to the normie pod, folks.
So you want to jump into Vaporwave is Dead?
I guess we gotta,
We gotta.
folks, we gotta talk about Vaporwave is dead.
The genre finally died.
Yeah, no, it just like that, just out of nowhere, it died.
Rest in peace,
Um,
Vaporwave.
so in the same year that Telepath would release his, we would also see the creation of Dream Catalog, a label specifically for Vaporwave.
Oh yeah.
The idea being that it's an independent label to help publish up and coming Vaporwave artists. A lot of people seem to have a beef with this for some freaking reason. So whatever. They would make all sorts of weird jokes about how vaporwave is dead, as if a genre with an active community is dead. Music is still being produced and the genre is dead. Like disco is dead, sure. It reached its saturation point and it went away. It's probably for the best, and maybe vaporwave will hit that eventually. Probably will, and it's probably for the best that it does because we don't need endless nostalgia, an era that increasingly fewer people will have any memory of.
Exactly.
But Dream Catalog was pretty important at that time. But in the following year, we would see the creation of Vaporwave is Dead, an album apparently celebrating or
Mourning.
memorializing. Yeah, I don't know. Is it like an epitaph? Who knows?
That's what I think.
The name seems rather hostile, so I'm gonna go with it's celebrating the death.
Yeah.
So Vaporwave is dead. We need to talk about Vaporwave is dead. But what did you take away after listening to this?
My takeaway is that it's like the antithesis to everything that vaporwave is and what it stood for originally. Where vaporwave had like this light haunting quality of like discomfort, but also is paired with this nostalgia comfort and looking back on memories, giving you like vivid images of the past. With like light echoes paired with everything, and like you said, that underwater feel. Vaporwave is Dead is really hard hitting and rough to listen to.
Oh yeah, no, it's particularly. I wouldn't say it's aggressive, but it's. Did I already say post vaporwave?
Earlier you mentioned that,
I think I
but
said post ironic.
oh yeah,
Okay.
okay, no post
Yeah,
vaporwave.
it's post vaporwave. It is music created out of a reaction, a different genre. Um, it's probably got lots of influences that I'm not picking up on because I'm an idiot, and that's fine. I think it's quite good, but it is definitely not the kind of pleasant, dissonant, kind of far away sound that you're getting at a floral shop or Blink Banshee or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's definitely nothing like Telepath. Like Telepath might be its antithesis entirely.
Exactly.
Vaporwave is Dead is the celebration that, all right, this era is over, on to the next thing. Of course, that's complicated by the fact that many albums would then follow it, but you couldn't say that these are zombie versions of the original.
Post vaporwave, vaporwave.
Yeah,
Or
they're the
rebirth
dregs
maybe.
that live sham releasing new beats. Okay, I said no more metaphors. We're gonna cut that. We're gonna cut it. All right, next thing.
All right. Where to from here, buddy?
So let's talk about the sound of the genre as a whole.
Okay.
I had a particular image conjured by almost every one of these tracks.
I
That
feel the same way.
is, yeah. Often the images are weirdly specific.
Mm-hmm.
It helps that. Okay, so when I was a kid, and I don't know about you, but when I was a little kid, first console I ever had was a Sega Genesis. Now the Genesis already out of date at the time. Those of you who are attentive will realize I was born in 1994, and in the year 2000, I got a Sega Genesis. Now that what year did the Genesis come out? Like 87 or something? It was old, right? It
It
was
was
very
really
outdated
old at that
already.
point.
So all I played were Streets of Rage and Sonic the Hedgehog for God knows how long. Um, and then finally, I get a friggin' GameCube, and I get to play Sonic Adventure and that Monkey Ball game,
Ah, yeah.
and the one with Kirby, and like Mario Kart. Okay, so not exactly the things that influence Vaporwave. Maybe Sonic the Hedgehog. You can argue the Genesis has. I mean, well, Echo Jams is the Mega Drive. That
The
that whole thing.
the Genesis has a lot of ties to vaporwave.
Yeah, and that is true, and we'll see it in options that the Mega Drive's games heavily influenced that because the Mega Drive was known for having the more violent, more aggressive games because it had like a faster processor
Yeah,
compared
and
to other consoles.
it had all these arcade ports too. That was
Yeah.
the
One
main
Sega for
selling.
like the arcade masters too.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that was a long tangent. So the sound of this genre is in particular ways that are hard to account for. I hear a telepath track, for example, and the image I get is I'm at an internet cafe with no walls and no ceiling. It's, tiled floor, it's nice and clean. There are nice organized rows of big chunky like Emacs, with like the back that goes out really far. Um, Little white keyboards and those weird old mice that had like um
The balls on it.
no, it's got the middle button and then the two side ones, like the really old computer mice.
Oh, I think
I'm at this weird computer station in what appears to be an internet cafe, but with no walls, no ceiling, and we're in the middle of the jungle. They're like wild birds calling out while I'm sitting here, and that's probably intentional. A lot of the album art that Telepath uses is very evocative in particular ways, and a lot of the art that accompanies these videos on YouTube, where it's got the music playing over like maybe a loop of footage or something, they'll often use like pleasant little tropical scenes. There's like a big like palm tree and setting sun vibe that runs throughout a lot of these tracks. Um, what about like Sailor Wave and some of like the Outrun and other offshoot genres? What are you getting at the sound of?
I'd say for they all have the same purpose, right? It's to invoke that nostalgia, and
Oh yeah,
for
that's
each
that's the whole point.
individual offshoot of vaporwave, it has like a very it gives me a different feeling. But as a whole, it always gives me the sensation that I'm just kind of hanging out at my room and I'm like 5, 7, whatnot, like really young, and just kind of hanging out watching TV as like random ass commercials are showing when it's like 4 in the morning and I'm the only person awake and I'm like just kind of chilling, looking at the stars, maybe even watching the sunrise every now and then. It's a very deep and secluded feeling I get.
Yeah, there's always a sensation of loss, and this is probably very important. A lot of these tracks are kind of melancholy. Very few, like unabashedly positive sounding, but very few of them are really like aggressive and particularly loud or in your face, or they're not really downers so much, but they are kind of melancholy. There's a feeling that there was this time that once was. That was a sentence that I just said. There was this time before, but it is gone now and can never be recaptured. But here is the faint memory of it. And like we said before, that is kind of the whole genre, really.
Yeah.
A lot of these albums would have like accompanying video that is trying its damnedest to evoke that. But I've noticed they avoid certain kinds of media. They don't really use action movie footage of any kind. They'll stick to anime if they have to. They'll stick to generally happy imagery, but they'll filter it in a way so it does feel distant and kind of, you know, uh, like
Melancholy.
shrouded in something, right? There's always a filter over it or something, like a
Mm-hmm.
VHS kind of effect. So let's move on here. We've waffled enough. Let's talk about some culture. All right.
Yeah, man.
Um, so the impact of the genre on culture. Now, an important thing to note, and a thing that we'll probably say again many times because I'll forget that I said it here. Um, Things on the internet can be famous, and there are big quotes around that word, but they're not famous. You couldn't ask your parents what they think of friggin' uh, telepath or like I don't know who else we got here. Yeah, Daniel Lopatin or whatever. It it would go nowhere. You could ask them what they think of Lisa Frank 420, and they're not gonna know what the hell you're talking about. But on the internet, you can say that, and people will be like, "Wait a minute," and then they'll Google it and be like, "Oh yeah, I've heard this. I like it," or they'll tell you the vaporwave is bullshit and stop bothering them.
Right.
Uh, Depending on where you're messaging them, don't DM people questions about vaporwave, folks. It's not a good idea. There's this like inherent irony in the genre, right?
Yeah.
This vaporwave playlist describes it as a deadpan recontextualization of glossy corporate music from a small number of artists on the internet, restructuring sound with heavy sampling of popular music and 80s and 90s TV ads, all looped, slowed down, pitch altered with chop and screw fix. Wait, FX. Sorry, that's not fix. And all right, we all know the Diet Pepsi, you know, the woman drinking the diet, like that picture that they always use for like vapor.
Yeah.
And I think there's like that inherent irony is super. It's like the Marxist critique of like culture, though. Like this is the most vapid, empty kind of culture you can create. Is just commercial bullshit. Like all you're trying to do is get someone to buy your thing. So you know you got a hot woman drinking the Diet Pepsi, but now you filter it, put some melancholy music over it, and you're like, don't you miss this time when all you cared about was what soda was advertised to you? Which one you would buy at the store, maybe? And you can talk about whether or not that's actively harmful, or you know, if that's just you know an interesting artistic statement to make. I don't think there's much harm that comes about through listening to this.
I don't think so either.
Um,
But yeah, I get what
no,
you're saying. It's definitely the fetishization of consumer culture, I want to say.
oh yeah, definitely. There's a there's a surreal thread that runs a lot of these albums. I think you made note of this originally, that a lot of this stuff is purposely extremely, I don't know, what's a good word, baroque. It's just hard to parse. Like it feels like it's really dense. Like there's so much emotion balled up in it. It's
Yeah.
it's in a dream world that you can't quite reach. And like we said before, that's the whole point. Is that it's obfuscated. It's hidden behind something. There's like nihilism, you know,
Oh yeah.
incorporated in a lot of the music.
It's very nihilistic. Because you know the whole thing is that you're looking back on it and you're thinking, oh, I wish I can go back to this time instead of being where I am right here, right now. Um, and I feel like a lot of people when they listen to this kind of stuff and they start like reminiscing on their youth or like you know their early childhood, they think, wow, things were like so much simpler back then. Uh, I just want to watch cartoons. You know, watch some Nickelodeon at like 9 p.m. whatnot. Instead of going to work or you know doing this boring thing I gotta do. You know.
Yeah, and there's a lot of utopian ideal in there too, though. At the same time, and that is, I think, to put it more succinctly, what really defines vaporwave is the mixture of the melancholy distance with kind of the warm affectation of looking back on something with nostalgia. You yearn for this time that probably never was,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, you feel that you've lost something great, something indescribable, right? There's a sense of loss and a sense that you want to go back to it, but also this kind of happy feeling that, like, remember this thing. I guess that's just nostalgia. That's really all that nostalgia is.
Yeah.
Um, we already made remarks about how it's not popular, but it is well known. No, let's talk about divergent genre.
Oh boy. Let's do it.
So this will be the last big topic for us to cover here.
All right.
So vaporwave was not the first microgenre. If you Google it, you'll find a Wikipedia page for it, which is embarrassingly short. It's a very short list of
It's
microgenres.
extremely short. I was shocked when I first looked at it.
Yeah, there's only like 8 things on there, I think. And vaporwave is like 2 of them, because one of them is an offshoot genre. But anyway, we'll get back to it. So I think vaporwave popularized this idea, but it probably always existed in music. Like it would be arrogant to say that niche sounds didn't exist before,
Mm-hmm.
because they definitely did. But now I think there's this idea that you can aim for a specific sound and have a name for it already. And if you accidentally create something new, well, you just give that a new name and maybe. And you end up with like Sailor Wave, which is an album but is also sometimes referred to as a genre, despite blatantly being vaporwave. Um, we would see the reintroduction of city pop and city funk, which was a genre in 1980s that became popular in urban centers among younger and working class people, uh, and would die off by the end of the decade and would be resurrected in the 2010s. Renewed interest in that kind of sound as a result of vaporwave and new artists reproducing this kind of music and compiling it. We would see it emerge as a new micro, an offshoot of vaporwave.
Yep. I'd,
Um,
I'd say
Sorry, go ahead.
personally that those subgenres are probably at this point become far more popular than vaporwave has at this point.
Yeah, and we said before that no, vaporwave isn't dead. That was just a big meanie thing to say and then make into an album. But vaporwave is kinda dead. But like, isn't that fitting that the thing that was all about nostalgia about a lost has now ended and quietly receded away? It'll always be there on the internet, well, until we're not going to get apocalyptic yet. So,
It's
but we see
lumbering.
new genres emerge out of it, new are fulfilling a specific niche and working towards a particular sound that we can kind of broadly call all of them vaporwave, right? The name vaporwave came from like the that whole Marxist critique that like the things you create are like vapor. Like there's no concept of the thing you've made because it's so abstracted away from you. Or if you ask someone who doesn't like talking Marx because he said the icky words and wrote the Red Book, then they'll tell you that it comes from the word vaporware, which is also fair. Software that is created and then never actually released, or that is announced and is never created, whatever it might be. Which both are quite fitting for the genre, right?
Oh
Both
yeah,
are both
definitely.
are describing parts of what the music is doing.
They accurately describe it. Yeah.
And we would see the creation of outrun as a genre.
Yes, that's a whole nother thing.
Um, yeah, we could do a friggin' episode about outrun. I find outrun interesting in that it's inspired by the game Outrun, arcade game where you race, and the races are normally set during the day and kind of cheery and bright and pixelated. It's an old video game, but outrun music isn't really cheery and bright and pixelated. It's often really like dark and rainy and kind of heavy and almost cyberpunk. Um,
I was surprised to learn that Outrun was like the genre was directly inspired off of that was an NES game,
I believe it was a Sega game.
a Sega game. Um, yeah, the contrast between that game and the aesthetic slash synthwavy music genre and how dark in tone they are.
Yeah, like synthwave in particular would be a little bit dark. Um, a much more, I guess, traditional kind of electronic sound, like
Yeah.
music that is entirely just composed, as music and not so heavily sampled from things and then remixed.
Mm-hmm.
And synthwave in particular would go for more of like a dreamy kind of feeling. And synthwave is not a new genre either. It has existed, right? It evolved through time and it kind of died down, got really, and then it reemerged with vaporwave.
Yeah, it came
Um,
back with the whole like '80s resurgence that we've seen in like pop culture over the past few years with stuff like Dungeons and Dragons coming back, with stuff like Stranger Things coming out and popularizing '80s imagery. Um, yeah, it's everywhere nowadays, and with that came the resurgence of synthwave and by extension of that Outrun.
yeah, and it's important to note that, especially towards towards the beginning, I guess, of the creation of the genre, there was always this apparent ease of access into the genre. Whether you were listening to it or trying to make the music for yourself, listening to it was easy. It could basically just be background music most of the time. But if you
Mm-hmm.
wanted to sit there and zone out and stare at the visuals, it was pleasant enough, at least for a little while. Um, and producing it seemed easy, right? And that was when we got the Vaporwave is Dead, all the overproduced crap, the thousands of tracks that all sounded the same.
Yeah, as you
And
mentioned earlier with some of the older albums we covered, you mentioned that a lot of those were made with GarageBand, something that really anyone can use with relative ease.
yeah, the idea that you can take some really low tech thing, really basic, something old too at the time was already old, and still make decent, really good music out of it. And later in these other genres, a similar ease of access, but more on the listener's end, especially with Outrun and Synthwave. Um, I find that Outrun draws a huge amount of inspiration directly from specific video games.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll have things that sound very much like a game soundtrack. Um, Synthwave, not so much, but it's there. And then you get like the really spacey synthwave. You get like these grand like odysseys, like you're going on a journey somewhere
Oh yeah.
through space, usually, right? You get micro genres like space wave, which I mean that's just silly. It's just synthwave. Let's not kid ourselves here.
I think one interesting distinction that you mentioned earlier that I want to bring back here again is that with the presentation of Vaporwave and the imagery behind it, you specifically mentioned that while the 90s had like lots of violent movies and all of that, most of what is showcased is like very calming atmospheres and just chill environments. With Outrun and Synthwave in particular, almost all of it is a lot more intense and invokes like 80s action. Stuff like Predator, stuff like Rambo,
Oh yeah,
um,
definitely.
like RoboCop and all of that. This was like the height of like the 80s action hero. And these genres and aesthetics definitely capture that very well.
Yeah, I think vaporwave, at least initial vaporwaves, purposeful avoidance of the things that felt too real or too gritty or whatever it might have, um, was easily exploited by a genre or a subgenre, whatever you want to call it, a micro genre that was more just interested in making music out of something. It's still, dealing with some nostalgia. You could to tracks that have like samples from like the 1980s OVA of Stardust Crusaders. Uh, and like I mean, that is influenced by vaporwave in a big way,
Yeah.
but it does not sound like vaporwave. It's like a actiony beat with occasional English thrown in, um, because of course Joseph Joestar has to think terrible English all the time.
You got it.
Um, and you got your auras and stuff. Okay, I'm not going to talk about JoJo's Bizarre Adventure,
JoJo is another conversation for another day.
bro. There's like 3 episodes. It's gonna be okay. And that
I'd
we're
love to cover part. I'd love to cover all the parts someday, but another time.
we'll, we'll get to that. Um, all right, I think that about does it for today.
I believe we have thoroughly covered just about everything that we could possibly cover regarding this.
Yeah, and as we listen more, um, if any of you ever have any suggestions for particular tracks to listen to, new releases, or a topic you would like for us to cover, you can always leave a comment under the video. That would help a lot. If this isn't being uploaded as a video and is instead being uploaded, I have no idea where you would post a comment, so I'm sorry.
Give them the email.
Oh yeah. What is the email?
Okay, so if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or you want to drop suggestions to us, you can send them over at dialupdesert at
At gmail.com.
gmail.com. Is there a space there, or?
It's all one word, and it's dessert, by the way, not desert.
Fuck, I'm dyslexic, by the way, if you haven't noticed.
It's a good thing that I took the notes. It's dialupdessert at gmail.com. You can email us any ideas you got. Please, for the love of God, do not spam us with the same email over.
Please spam.
And do not at me on Twitter or anything, because I will block you immediately.
Please at him at Twitter.
Yeah, send all your questions directly to my. Anyway, that was Dial Up Dessert. Episode 1, Vaporwave. Thank you all for listening, and see you next time.
Yep. Bye, everybody.